So tool number 3 in the set is a tool that I guess in certain ways you hope you never have to use, but it's the unsetting tool. Really, it's just a very, very highly polished little wedge. Now, we have all had to unset a stone one time or the other. And there's two major things, of course, that you don't want to happen. You don't want to damage your stone. And ideally, you don't want to damage your bezel. I mean, sometimes you may just be, like, I'm going to melt down this piece. I don't like it. I'm going to, redo the whole thing. And that's one thing. But a lot of times you're going to want to be able to keep everything as pristine as possible. And if you don't have a really nice unsetting tool, you're not going to be able to do that, and you can also potentially damage your stone. Now, sometimes also people will use an unsetting tool if they've gotten partway setting, they're almost all the way done, and then maybe they notice that something shifted and it's at the wrong angle and they need to adjust it. So the unsetting tool will work for all of that. Actually, I have a few other sort of off-label uses for it that I'll show you in another video. But this is the tool. You're not going to use it every day, but when the day comes that you need it, you'll be really happy that you do. And this is another tool that I've been making these for students for 25 years because whenever we needed to unset a stone, I would say, okay, we're going to make you your own unsetting tool. The real trick with an unsetting tool is just that it's really highly polished. It can't have anything on there that can leave any kind of scratch. It basically just tapers down to a very fine little tip that's so soft and smooth that you can kind of slide it between the metal and your stone without creating any damage. Like I said, you don't need it every day, but when you need it, you'll be very happy you have it. And here's just an extreme close-up of the unsetting tool. You can see that it's just a very highly polished little wedge. And that is what you get between your bezel and your stone. And that's how you're able to unset your stone without making a mess of everything. So just to show you a little bit how the unsetting tool works, this is a garnet that I'm unsetting. I made it for somebody, a dear friend, many, many years ago, and a relative of hers now has it, and it needs to be unset because we need to really change the size of the shank, and just a small adjustment with the stone in there is not going to do it. So this is one of those situations where, yes, you want to unset. So you can see that I started already. Basically what you do is you find whatever spot you feel like has the most space between the bezel and the stone. Now, in theory, there's no space between the bezel and the stone anywhere in a perfect world, but you go and look first, because basically if there's any spot that you have a tiny bit of an in, that's where you want to start. When you're using one of these unsetting tools, you can see it's really just a very highly polished wedge. You put the curved portion up against the stone, because that curve creates a little clearance for you to get in there. I put the tool in the palm of my hand and I just press a little bit like so. And you can see that it's just sort of opening up the bezel. Now, you might think that the best thing to do is sort of start opening it up at north, south, east, and west like you do when you're setting. But I actually find that that leaves more marks. So normally what I do is once I have a place that's open, I just keep working my way around. I go counterclockwise around, and I'm just going to press in a little bit and then slide it down a little bit like that. And that's pretty much how it opens up. Holding the tool in the palm of your hand, of course, that way you can sort of add a little pressure, because really all you're doing, what you're not doing is putting it in there, and going back and forth like that. All you're really doing is getting it in a little bit and pressing in a tiny bit. Because this is tapered, by pressing it a little deeper in, you're opening it up. And that's a relatively subtle movement and doesn't really scratch or ding up your bezel, because the whole goal with this is to leave your bezel maybe not completely unscathed, but as unscathed as is reasonably possible. Usually you'll have to just sand down the tiny bit, but if you do this carefully, your bezel's still usable. And not to mention your stone, because if you were to get in there and be too violent, you might scratch or ding up your stone, which you really wouldn't want to do. So the tool goes, like they all do, in the palm of my hand. I can really just put my finger right on top to kind of guide it. And what I'm going to do is place it in here. I'll try to shift around so you can see a little bit better. Okay, I just press it right there and I just slide in a little tiny bit. The fact that it's such a polished wedge is what's going to force it open. So you see, the movements that I'm doing are very small. This is absolutely not a case of put it in there and like, you know what I mean, rock it back and forth. You're not shucking an oyster. Please don't do that. It'll make a mess of everything and it can break your stone. Okay, so I'll show you again. You just put it right there at the edge and just slide in a little tiny bit. And it just forces it away from the stone a little bit. And you'll notice I'm just working my way around the stone. I'm not going to multiple separate areas to make a new opening. I find it's easier once you have created a little space between the stone and the bezel to just keep sliding it down as you work your way. Now, I'm not necessarily going to have to go all the way around the stone because more than likely at a certain point, this is already, you know, a little loose. What's going to happen is it's going to become loose enough that I'm going to be able to pop it out. So I'm going to kind of just keep going around, press in. You see how I'm just working my way down? And my movements are very small. It's like however much you think you should be moving, move less. That's usually what I tell my students when we're unsetting. Okay, just like that. And again, just like with setting, the force is coming from my shoulder. I mean, it's not that I'm pushing very, very hard, but again, it's not my fingers. You notice you don't see my hand kind of like, you know, doing that like clenching thing, because that's not what gives you the force. I'm leaning in a little bit. The force is coming from my shoulder, travels down my arm through the handle of the tool, and all I really need to do is just lean in a tiny bit, and that's what gives me my force. And just like that. The movement is so small, it's actually not particularly easy to capture because you don't really see much happening almost at all, but if you'll take a look, you can see that the bezel continues to open and open and open. And it's not quite wiggling around enough to the point where I can get it out, so I'm going to keep going. But I'm just going to do this and slide it all the way around. Or I'm going to slide it around enough that I can get this little guy out. Okay, so watch carefully. Right at the edge, and I just slide in a little tiny bit. That's all that movement is. It's very, very minimal. See, just like that. So you can see how much the bezel has opened up now, and I'm just continuing counterclockwise to gently work my way around the stone. The stone is relatively set deeply, so it's going to take probably a trip all the way around, opening it all just a little for me to be able to pull it out, because I keep testing it with my finger, and although there's a little wiggle, I don't think that's quite enough for me to be able to get it out. So I'm just going to keep working just the same exact way, taking my little wedge, putting it in there and pressing down in a little bit until I pop the stone out. Now, nobody really loves to unset stones, because usually when you unset stones, it means that something has gone badly. Well, guess what? Sometimes things go to shit, and that's just life. So you have to be prepared and know how to deal with it. Because although you may not want to unset your stone, If you need to unset it, you can use the unsetting tool, unset it properly, not damage the stone, and use it again and reset or put a different stone in there or whatever it is that you need to do. The key with all of it is not to assume that everything is always going to go perfectly. It's just to understand how to fix the inevitable fuck ups that basically constitute life, as far as I know it. So that's why I felt like the unsetting tool, although you won't use it constantly, is an essential part of the master setting toolkit.